Momentum is building. Now let's see what the charts actually confirm. This is Bitcoin on Point, where I give you the only news that matters and the cleanest technical analysis to trade the best asset in the world, Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin isn't moving in isolation right now. When you actually zoom out, what's happening across Bitcoin with gold and with Ethereum, it starts to paint a very interesting story. This isn't just about Bitcoin anymore. This is about where capital is rotating next. Now, before we break down the charts, let's zoom out because the macro backdrop right now is quietly turning constructive. Treasury Secretary Bessent has said that the US is removing restrictions on crypto and digital assets regulation and embracing stablecoin adoption in the coming months and years. Speculative optimism. This is the US signaling that regulatory clarity and on-chain dollars are coming. This is direct integration, not resistance. And it's the kind of macro shift that matters before the price reacts. Now, whales are also back accumulating Bitcoin again. Whales are back in full effect. Addresses holding 1,000 plus Bitcoin just flipped from net selling to heavy accumulation. Retail watches the price, whales watch the liquidity, and right now they are stepping back in. So this shift aligns perfectly with liquidity that's resting below the price, compression across multiple timeframes for Bitcoin, and ultimately this is how the positioning starts, right? And we also have ETH that's gaining relative strength. Together, this is a macro tailwind signal. Now let's look at options because we have a massive expiry today. $2.2 billion worth of Bitcoin and Ethereum options expire on the 2nd of January. This doesn't change the trend, but it does increase the odds of short-term volatility, liquidity sweeps, and fake moves before direction actually resolves. We need to keep this in mind as we go back to the charts. And we're going to look at the intermarket context. We're going to look at Bitcoin versus gold because there's a very similar structural replication that's going on right now. And Bitcoin is sitting right at the exact consolidation point that gold did just before a massive breakout to new all-time highs. And gold was initially under this compression level of resistance, which was very shaky. But once it actually did tackle its resistance on this triangle, it did get a massive continued breakout. So Bitcoin is now in the same exact zone. Are we likely to see continuation and the follow-up behind gold? This doesn't guarantee any sort of upside by any means, but it does mean that Bitcoin is behaving like an asset preparing for expansion, not for distribution, right? And Bitcoin historically does tend to catch up with these precious metals when they run, and this structure is definitely not something you want to ignore, with Bitcoin sitting back at the critical support trend line. So now this is where things get important. We're going to look at ETH versus Bitcoin on the weekly, and there could be a potential massive rotation signal. Because if we analyze ETH down here in the blue against Bitcoin dominance, whenever Bitcoin dominance has tapped out and started a massive downtrend, this is where ETH really picks up the pace against Bitcoin. And in the past, this is where altcoins historically follow suit. We are seeing the same identical replications in ETH versus Bitcoin, where it's picking up strength, risk appetite is expanding, and this is where capital tends to rotate within crypto. And again, as I said, altcoins eventually follow suit. So if we do see Bitcoin dominance take a fall off of the cliff here, this is where ETH could start to outperform Bitcoin, and essentially altcoins will pick up the pace. So this isn't just Ethereum strength. It's not just bullish for ETH. It's structurally important for the broader crypto market. And we'll break down altcoins separately, but for now, Ethereum is the main signal. Now, analyzing ETH on the weekly time frame here, we have a very important trend line that if the bulls do step in and reclaim, this is where we could see that ultimate push back up to the highs that ETH has fallen from. So a weekly close above this trend line would signal a massive shift in trend direction. And historically, if we do reclaim it, ETH doesn't move quietly once it breaks trend lines. This is the kind of level that can launch long duration rallies, and again would be beneficial for the broader crypto market. Now, on the 4-hour time frame, zooming into ETH, we have a major level of supply sitting above at 3.1k. We have these higher lows that are curling up over time with macro support that waits below. So at this supply zone, if ETH does start to push up towards it, there are two potential scenarios. We either pull back into the 4-hour support block to sweep liquidity before the continuation, or we see a pullback into support before getting that break. And both of these scenarios typically mean trend acceleration. Both of them are bullish. The difference is simply path, not the direction. The bullish outcome is resorting back through supply, and the bearish short-term outcome is resorting back to 4-hour support to load up the spring before going for the next continuative breakout. So after understanding Ethereum, the question naturally comes up now, what about Bitcoin? You know, is Bitcoin doomed? Is Bitcoin destined to fall into the abyss? Of course not. If we actually analyze Bitcoin on the daily, Ethereum, again, tends to move first, right? But Bitcoin is still the market anchor. This is something we can't deny, right? So once ETH is actually showing strength, the next step is to check whether Bitcoin is actually supporting that move. So ETH does have supply above at 3.1k, and Bitcoin also does have daily supply above, which could determine the paths in the next coming weeks. So, you know, let's divert back to the shift. Let's divert back to Bitcoin, because on the daily chart, price is evidently pushing higher, but we do have the supply above roughly at 91 to 93k. And this tells us the move is structure. However, there is still liquidity that is resting below. So if Bitcoin does get this initial push up into supply and meets it as resistance, we could initially see a sweep back down into the daily support from lows back in late December and even dating back to late November in the $84,000 territory. We've been covering this in several videos. 84k is the major daily support zone, and we have supply between 90 to 93 to 94k. So this scenario would entail Bitcoin coming in for a reset back down to daily support after rejecting the supply, and this could also tie up with ETH breaking above its trend line but coming back to turn it into support. So we do need to keep our eyes on Bitcoin here. If we do get that continuation into supply, then we could witness a dip to clean liquidity before the actual continuation. Either way, the structure remains constructive as long as the daily levels of $84,000 hold as support. So with looking at Bitcoin on the daily, let's zoom in a little further. Let's look at Bitcoin on the 4-hour. And there's a couple of things to really highlight here. One of which is Bitcoin is back above its 100 EMA, which will act as a level of support if we do come back in for a correction. But this is a very good signal and could be highlighting the move back up into $90,000. Now, $90,000 is a very interesting level because we've seen many points of contact in the past that have acted as a level of resistance. I mean, even on this high here from the 29th of December, very close to that supply before coming back down to this green trend line. Now, this green trend line has been holding as support since mid-December, and every time Bitcoin has come back down towards this trend line, it has seen strong relief back into the $90,000 territory. So with this being said, we have the 100 EMA as support. You know, the respecting trend line in green is also below as a major catalyst for price to bounce. We are printing these higher low structures over time, and it's very evident to see, right? Bitcoin is in the middle of trying to find a key level of support, holding its key EMAs on the lower time frames, and wants to ultimately break through the supply at $90,000. So as long as this green trend line holds, and as long as we are above the 100 EMA support, these two factors could contribute to a push back above $90,000. Now, momentum hasn't broken, volatility may show up, but the trend on the lower time frames is still intact. And even if we do sweep lower after tapping into sort of $90,000, if Bitcoin does get this push up to 90k and we do see a pullback, then we have the daily support below as an extra relief mechanism. So when we actually pull this all together, right? Macro regulations are easing, stablecoins are being embraced. Bitcoin versus gold is forming a very similar structure where the precious metal ripped to new all-time highs. If Bitcoin follows suit, we could be looking at further expansion. ETH versus Bitcoin relative strength is rising, and these signals have also printed bullish rallies for altcoins, seeing altcoin signals in the past. We also have BTC structure, which is still intact with supply above that needs to be broken, but major critical support waiting below. So, ETH structure is in breakout mode. ETH is looking to reclaim a very important trend line, which could be a major catalyst. This isn't a time to really panic in the market. This is a rotation-driven positioning, right? We need to let the structure play out. Let's see what ETH and Bitcoin do, and we will always have this covered. So my final thoughts, right? Follow the smart money. This phase isn't about chasing the price by any means. It's about watching where liquidity is, where whales are positioning, and which assets are actually leading the race right now, right? And amongst all of it, Bitcoin's structure is scary, but still solid. Ethereum is starting to lead the way, and we're seeing that capital rotation very, very slowly, but surely. So for now, the message is simple. I think that we need to keep our eyes on ETH, respect the confirmation levels, and let rotation, not emotion, guide the trade. Now, if you want to support the channel, the links below are there for you. You can trade on the platform we use, get fee discounts and bonuses. It's completely optional, but it really helps the channel grow. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next update.